Hello everyone, welcome to Tactica Imperialis and to today's video. Today is going to be another My Thoughts On, and today I wanted to talk about Wrath and Rapture, or Realm of Chaos, Wrath and Rapture, to give it its full name. This is the newest boxed game for both Warhammer 40,000 and Warhammer Age of Sigmar, and at the time of you watching this video, I believe it is on pre-order, due to come out at the weekend. The reason that this box game gets a little extra video, whereas some box games don't, is because I think there's a lot more to talk about with it, both in terms of the stuff that's actually in it, and also what it sort of represents as a boxed game. And I'll start there because I think that's a little harder to explain. So, you might have noticed that the overarching trend with boxed games is a very classic dynamic of good guy versus bad guy, stereotypically speaking. So, Space Marines versus basically everything, because that's how Space Marines are painted. Stormcast versus Death or Chaos. If you go back to older editions, you had Space Marines versus Orcs. In Fantasy, you had High Elves versus Skaven, Dwarves versus Goblins. Those sorts of matchups, they were generally good guy versus bad guy, in terms of their sort of archetypal place within the canon. They weren't obviously perfect factions, that's obvious, we know that we're Warhammer players, but generally that was the idea. And with the exception of Wake the Dead, I can't think of a box set that didn't go by this trend. Because Wake the Dead, you could argue, is good guy versus good guy, in that it's Space Marines versus Eldari. You could argue the craft worlds are archetypal good guys, but whenever you put Space Marines up against somebody, they have to sort of play the bad guys. So you could argue that's good guy versus good guy, but Wrath and Rapture, I think, might be the first bad guy versus bad guy box set that we've had in a long, long time. I racked my brains about this. I can't think of another bad guy versus bad guy box game. I can remember the odd box sets. You could argue some of the old Flyer box sets where it was like Orcs versus Tau, depending on your viewpoint. That could be argued, I guess. But I can't think of a bad guy versus bad guy box set, which is interesting in and of itself. And the fact that it's actually a same faction bad guy versus bad guy is something that, again, we haven't explored, particularly because it's chaos versus chaos. We've all heard about the fact that the Chaos Gods don't get along. We've all heard of the Great Game. We've all heard of the demonic legions going to war with one another at the whims of the gods constantly. That's particularly how 40k's lore tells it, that the Chaos Gods are just constantly arguing in the warp and fighting these massive wars, and getting into real space to go and cause some mayhem is a welcome break for demons. So we've heard a lot about the Great Game, but we don't see that manifested in lore or on tabletop all that often. Off the top of my head, I can think of the recent stuff with Gathering Storm, where Khorne attacked Tzeentch for Guilliman. We had the wars in the Scourge Stars during the Plague Wars, which pulled Nurgle away from Ultramar to have this big contest with the other gods over the Scourge Stars. And other than that, I can't think of any particular... Oh, and there's one with Typhus. He gets his stuff from the Garden of Nurgle. He gets his scythe boosted from everything because he helped defend the Garden of Nurgle from, I believe, a Khorne assault. There's probably the odd one, like the old Traitor Legion wars back in M32, but it's generally something that is in the background. You don't often see it front and center. Here is the Great Game, either on a mortal side or on a demonic side. So I think it's a really interesting box game that we get to play that up and actually talk about that at length. And one thing I'm really hoping for with the lore booklet or getting started booklet that you typically get with these box games is that we get something that talks about the Great Game in greater depth, particularly in Age of Sigmar. Because while we know that the Great Game was quite well established in 40k, it's always sort of been, I'm recalling the top of my head here, it's always been a sort of a side point in Age of Sigmar, because Chaos is sort of a bit more under Archaon's boot than it is under Abaddon's. So it's not quite the same. But generally, I'd love to see this played up, have it explored, talk a bit more in depth about why the Great Game alignments are the way they are, why people hate certain people, and some of the famous battles that have taken place. I know I'm probably asking for a lot for a 20 to 40 page start gaming booklet that also has to deal with like special missions and all the rules. But I'd like to see it played up a little bit because I find this aspect of the lore for both 40k and AOS very interesting because it's something we don't get to see very often. I'd love to make a lore video about the great game, the wars between the demons, but I can't because there's not enough information there. At least I don't think there is off the top of my head. So that's why I'm sort of doing this video on why I think Wrath and Rapture is such an interesting box game in general, but don't just take my word for it. There's a lot going on in this box, so let's see what GW had to say about it. 8 ways to use your box set. Yeah, they gave Khorne the boost. So 2 narrative campaigns, because obviously 2 game systems. 1 box, 2 games, 2 game systems. 4 new units, which we'll get to. Get a bit of rules preview as well. You've got the Demons Naming Table, which I found quite interesting. There's a little table you're going to get to be able to auto-generate demonic names, which is kind of fun. They do lie, obviously, under the Chaos banner. So if you're a Chaos player who doesn't particularly care for aligning to one god in particular, you basically get 2 armies here, which is very, very useful for you. And if you're a non-Chaos Demons player and you just generally play with chaotic stuff, well, you get a bunch of allies you can use for your Slaves of Darkness, Khorne Bloodbound, Chaos Space Marines. Heck, Traitor Knights are in chapter approved again, so they could use them as well. And of course, you get a boost for Khorne, a boost for Slaanesh, which is something that we haven't had for a while. Khorne got some love, particularly for Age of Sigmar, around the time of AOS 1's release, but Tzeentch has taken the wheel for a while. Nurgle, particularly toward the end of 2017, start of 2018, really took the wheel. And now we get to see a bit more Khorne, and I think Slaanesh will probably get its time in the sun pretty damn soon. So yeah, just a bit more long-winded stuff there. And also talk about start collecting bosses, which of course we have. But now we get on to the actual contents of the box. And this is where I think things get very interesting, because these are the first Slaanesh models we've had in about 4 to 5 years. I think there certainly hasn't been a Slaanesh model since I came to university, and that was 3.5 years ago. The last Slaanesh models I remember were the, what are they called? The Combine Harvester, the Exalted Seeker Chariots, and the Hellflayer, I think it's called. The Giant Combine Harvesters, as I just sort of nicknamed them. I think they were the last Slaaneshi models that we had, and that was before Age of Sigmar, because I remember there was a little rules pamphlet in the White Dwarf about how to use them in fantasy, because they put the Soul Grinder into fantasy at that time. So it was a very long time ago. And people have talked for a while about like where did Slaanesh go, and are they trying to get Slaanesh out of the game? That was a sort of rumor / discussion / idea that went around for a long, long time. And I'm glad to report that they're definitely not shying away from Slaanesh too much, if at all, gauging by what we've seen. So there's the units I think that are coming in the box. You've got some Demonettes, some Seekers, some Fiends, and the new Herald, the Infernal Enrapturess. I don't think this is going to be the last Herald of Slaanesh that we see, because if Nurgle has taught me anything, demonic heralds now just get different titles. So you had the Spoilpox Scrivener, the Sloppity Bile Piper. There might have even been other demonic heralds that I just don't know. So I get the feeling there will be at least one more Slaaneshi herald name available. Maybe they'll just upgrade the herald on Seeker Chariot to have a unique name. Or maybe there'll be one on Steed, I don't know. But I do think we'll be seeing another Herald of Slaanesh in the future. And I've said it before in previous videos where I've talked about Wrath and Rapture, but the model is very, very, very good in the worst possible way. Well, yeah, it's very bad in the best way, or very good in the worst way. As it's brilliant, but it's also horrifyingly gruesome and creepy. Because as you sort of see at the back of the image, it's playing a harp made out of basically sinew and stuff coming out of this poor sap's back, and it's just, oh, it rubs me all the wrong way. It's really creepy, but that's what Slaanesh can be. Slaanesh isn't just about, as I've said before in previous videos, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. That isn't what Slaanesh is all about. Sure, they have that stuff, see the new Noise Marine model, but Slaanesh can go in any direction with excess. And so this idea of heightened emotion and sensory stimulation, for want of a better word, is just, oh, it's horrifying, but it's brilliant. And in terms of tabletop, they're actually not that bad. So for 40k, you get, it's called the Heartstring Lyre. So that's an appropriate name, I think. So 6 shots with a decent range and some rend, or AP, sorry. That's not bad. Or you could boost it, go for a single shot, double the strength, 3 AP, and damage 3, allowing you to crack things in much heavier armor. This means that the Infernal Enrapturess is a good jack-of-all-trades ranged character, and because it's a Herald of Slaanesh, I suspect it will be a decent enough melee fighter, even if it's not exactly on the level of a Herald of Khorne or a Herald of Nurgle. It will certainly pack enough of a punch. And I'm hoping that that will be the case. And they've also given Slaanesh, both in 40k and AOS, what I'm going to call caster disruption ability. That's probably the best word I've got because I don't want to use Psyker or Wizard. So, as it says here, enemy Psykers attempting to cast psychic powers within 24 inches will suffer perils of the warp if they roll a double. Any double. Not just like a double 1 or a double 6 or whatever perils it is because I don't use Psykers. Any double. So, that's really interesting because historically, Khorne and Tzeentch were the two factions associated with magic, psychic powers, and the like. Because Khorne was all about nullifying them, had the brass collars on the Fleshhounds, and generally had this disdain for sorcery. Khorne has always been the anti-magic sort of person. Whereas Tzeentch has been all about using bucket loads of magic and throwing so much power at you that you just can't stop it. So it stood to reason that either Khorne or Tzeentch would get the magic disruptor. Khorne because anti-magic, and Tzeentch because we have so much control over the tides of the warp or the winds of magic that you just can't use them properly because we have too much dominance. As it is, they've given that ability to Slaanesh. And I'll be very interested again when Slaanesh gets its Battletome for Age of Sigmar, or when it gets an update for 40k, why they've given it to Slaanesh. Maybe it's just a thing for this particular Herald, that they get Psychic Disruption, but I find it interesting that it's there, because it's something that I haven't associated with Slaanesh before, so interesting. They also get a boost for summoning, so if you perform a demonic ritual to summon a Slaaneshi demon unit, with this thing, you get 3 extra on the casting roll, which is obviously useful, and you can also regenerate nearby Slaaneshi demon units, including, as they mentioned, Fiends or Seekers. If you have units of Chariots, I don't know if they have the demon keyword, I suspect they do, so if you can get a unit of the Hellflayers or whatever they're called, that could be very, very, very naughty indeed. Like, ow, that could be seriously painful. So, yeah, I think it's pretty nice. We'll have to see how cost efficient the Enrapturess is, but they definitely do pack a punch, and I think they'll be very used in Slaanesh armies. Whether they'll see play in general demon armies remains to be seen. Whether they'll be used outside of basically just Slaanesh demons remains to be seen, because they can summon in units for themselves that they can then top up. They've got an okay shooting attack with some decent punch as well. And they've got that Psychic Disruption, which against certain opponents is obviously very useful. So we shall see. I think they've got potential. It depends on how they're costed. Now, in Age of Sigmar. Very similar for the ranged weapon. So again, 18 inches, 6 shots versus 24 inch 1 shot. Hit roll of a 3+ for the many attacks, 2+ for the single attack. And then a better wound roll. The rend again is 1 versus 3. Although the boosted version is damage D3 as opposed to damage 3 in the 40k version. Bear in mind, though, wounds do spill over in Age of Sigmar, so 3 wounds to a unit of 2 wound models in 40k kills 1 person. In AOS, it kills 1.5. So maybe that's why it's D3, is to make it a little bit less powerful against 2 wound units. I'm not sure. Harmonic alignment, as opposed to the summoning booster. Well, it is still a summoning booster in that it gives you more depravity points. Because depravity points, according to Slaanesh's Allegiance ability, are what you use to summon stuff. So getting an extra 1 every single turn, or say one of your turns, means that you'll be able to generate on its own I believe it's one short of summoning a unit of demonettes on its own. So effectively, it's a free 10 demonettes, or maybe a free 5 demonettes, I forget off the top of my head, to bring this thing, which is actually, when you think about it that way, quite useful. And obviously, getting those points to stack up, it's a hero, so if it takes wounds and doesn't die, or if it uses its multiple shots or whatever to kill nothing but just do a bunch of plink wounds to a hero, that generates depravity points for you. So this thing can be a real summoning powerhouse if used correctly. And they've also got the disruption for wizards in this case, so it's actually more punishing this time because it's re-roll casting rolls for enemy wizards within 24 inches, so you're less likely to get your powers off, and if your re-roll is a double, you get whacked for D3 mortal wounds. So it's less consistent damage in that it's not a case of every single time you get a double, it's a trouble. Hey, that rhymes. It's a case of you screw them a little bit, and then you can double screw them by doing damage. So it's more punishing if it goes off, but it's less punishing generally because there's less chance of a perils happening. However, it's still another disruption ability, and I think it'll be interesting to see whether this is something that continues with Slaanesh going forward. And I'd also be interested to see... no, you don't inflict wounds with this ability. They suffer wounds, so it's not a case of you get depravity points off of doing this. That would be a little bit evil if that were the case. Maybe no slouch in combat, don't mistake it for front line, better as support, yeah, that all makes sense. Like, Heralds of Slaanesh can go, but they can't go quite the same. This is obviously a shooting-based herald, so definitely not designed to go toe-to-toe with your Lord Celestants or White Kings of this world. Use them on defense and support your army. If you can keep up, then that's useful. As for which faction of Slaanesh you should put this in, I don't know. Seekers is obviously not the best because they rely on massive amounts of speed, and I suspect this, by Slaanesh's standards, will be kind of slow. As for the other two, I can't think of one off the top of my head that is insane, though you could use, say, the Pretenders to keep this in your backfield while you have one big hero off at the front so they're never anywhere near each other, which is possibly kind of useful. So yeah, I'm not sure exactly which faction of Slaanesh I put this in, but I wouldn't put it in Seekers personally. Then we have the Fiends, and the Fiends, again, they're very much in the style of Slaanesh. They're very well designed, but they're horrifically creepy, and they're not my thing. But they are still playing up the Slaaneshi thieves a little bit of warps and excess and just everything over the top. So it still works. So stupid fast and bunch of attacks, which is obviously very useful. And they have a rule called Crushing Grip, which is in AOS. So if you roll a natural 6 to wound with its attacks, then damage D3. Yikes. These things are probably going to have 4 to 6 attacks. I'm not sure. Well, actually, I think I've got the stat line below, so we'll get to that in a second. No, I don't know. So yeah, 4 wounds each, so they're pretty tanky by Slaanesh's standards. And they've got a boosted single attack weapon that gives them a good bit of rend and damage. Interestingly, they're very different this time. So you can see on the 40k variant, it's AP 3 damage D3. But you only get 1 attack, it's strength user, so on and so on. In Age of Sigmar, it's 1 attack, hits on a 3, wounds on a 3, rend 1, and then the damage scales depending on what you're hitting. Against the single wound model, 1 damage. Something with 2 to 4 wounds, D3. And then, or 2 to 3, and then targets of 4 or more, damage D6. This means that it stops your Fiends just going crazy on the overkill, because I get the feeling that buffing attacks with Slaanesh is probably going to be easier, because obviously the 40k one says only a single attack. This just has 1 attack, but you can give it plus 1 attack. So it's probably to stop it going out of control with flat damage D3 on single wound units, but it's still interesting nonetheless that they've got this scaling wound damage, which is something it's kind of rare. Generally, the scaling wound damage is based on unit type. The only other weapon I can think off the top of my head that scales based on the number of wounds the target has Isnamati thralls with their two-handed weapons, which are like better wound rolls against one wound units and better damage against high wound units or something like that from Ida Death, which is interesting. So that's cool. And they have their soporific musk, which I believe they've always had, but it might just have a new name or new effect now. So track 1 for hit rolls for attacks made with melee weapons that target this unit. Ow! In addition, while this unit has 4 or more models, subtract 1 from wound rolls made with melee weapons. Oh my goodness, ow! This is really, 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 really bad for everybody that's not the Fiends. You just take 6 of these, let's say, all of a sudden, if they make it to melee, they're far harder to kill than you were expecting. Because if you try to charge down, let's say, a big unit of archers, they're generally hitting on 5s with their melee weapons. Now they're hitting you on 6s and probably wounding you on at best 5s. That's horrifying. And even if you take out the -1 to wound, -1 to hit is bad enough because that stops any non-natural 6 effects from going off. So anything that says on a hit roll of 6 or more that isn't unmodified, then it stops those effects going off, which is very, very dangerous. So that's not good. And they have another rule called Disruptive Song, which again is this anti-wizard disruption. So I guess that proves my point from earlier. They're giving Slaanesh anti-magic. So -1 from psychic tests or casting rolls made within 12 inches of a unit of fiends, which is very interesting. Why are they giving this to Slaanesh? I want to see the justification as to why. We then get about Seekers and Demonettes, I should say. Just to talk about how they work. Just if you're new to Slaanesh, this will be a quick look in. So Demonettes have an ass load of attacks with some rend. Seekers are stupid fast, particularly in the faction for Age of Sigmar that gives them that boost. So, yeah, Slaanesh is going to be interesting, and I look forward to seeing how they play. As for Khorne, well, it's a bit more, well, I'm not going to call it by the numbers, but Khorne is very much about melee with a side of other stuff. So, first off, Karanak's back. Yeah, we knew Karanak was back, we'd seen him before. Looking a little bit derpy to my mind, but still pretty cool model. And it's actually, yeah, he's got pretty useful powers. So in 40k, 2 psychic denies, which is pretty useful, and damage 2, AP 2 rendered melee attacks, which is very powerful. So Space Marines are boned if Karanak gets anywhere near them. I think this is primarily designed to give Khorne probably an anti-Primaris hero, because Hellblades and that lot are very good at putting out individual mortal wounds or having a lot of rend, if I remember off the top of my head, but they're not so good at doing multiple damage for the most part. So things like Karanak were probably very useful for chewing through small units of Primaris, or any decent mid-tier hero is going to be in a lot of trouble. On the Age of Sigmar side, 6 attacks, 4s, 3s, rend 1, damage D3, so it's a lot of attacks, a bit less rend than the 40k's AP, but higher damage, averages to the same. It's going to be pretty nasty indeed. The Brass Collar means that you get anti-magic and anti-psychic as before, and you get the chance to be Prey of the Blood God. I forget exactly how that ability works. I don't think it's in here, but it's still useful to know that Karanak is still going to be able to pick a target and chase them down, which is obviously very, very useful. I don't know if it's quite going to be on the level of Death Leaper, if Death Leaper's even still in the game, but it's still going to be good to see that, and I think that fits with Karanak very, very well. And they've also boosted his abilities to fit with Fleshhounds, which allows him to re-roll charges, and he can even summon Fleshhounds as well, at least in Age of Sigmar. So if you're near to your chosen target, you can summon 5 Fleshhounds onto the board within 12 inches of Karanak. So this is obviously very useful. Let's say Karanak's just about to make a charge. He's like 3 inches away, he just needs a nice easy charge and he's in. What you might want to do is put some Fleshhounds 12 inches the other side, so still 9 inches away from the enemy, to mean that the enemy can't fall back very effectively. Or of course you could use them to help Karanak out if it's a particularly dangerous quarry. So get 5 extra guys in to throw into the melee and protect Karanak, or just get more attacks in, as it would be in this case. I think that's a really nice combo, so approve. Speaking of the Fleshhounds, they've obviously got their new models as well. So they've got a new champion. Same as Fiends have got a boosted sort of Sergeant, so do Fleshhounds. And they've got a shooting attack now. In Age of Sigmar, this is just a single plink attack. In 40k, it's actually a pseudo-flamer in that it's auto-hit, but it's only a single shot. So it's probably not that useful, but if you've got a hero who's just clinging on to their last wound, you can just plink them off. Or, of course, if you're trying to get somebody's quarry down, cough Karanak, actually you'd be out of range for that shooting attack, it's 8-inch range, so maybe not. It's still pretty useful, and it will work. And then, of course, the rest of Wrath and Rapture comes with Blood Letters and Blood Crushers. I'll be honest, I love Juggernauts because I've said many a time down the years, I'm a huge fan of what I call chunky heavy cavalry. It's always been my word for them. So there's their stat lines if you are unfamiliar with them. I'm quite familiar with Juggernauts in AOS because I've faced them a bunch of times. They're actually not that hard punching, but my god, they're terrifying. Which is obviously very useful. And Blood Letters, yeah, AP -3. Thank you for reminding me how how powerful Hellblades were with AP -3. And on the other hand, you have the AOS where they do extra mortal wounds. That's where I'm getting confused, get my game systems mixed up. And you got a big unit, you get bonuses to hit. Just reminding you how Blood Letters work if you are unfamiliar with Khorne. So there you go. That's everything you're getting in Wrath and Rapture. I'm sure there will be some lore in there. Hopefully there'll be a bunch of there's always some counters, maybe some extra stuff as well that will allow you to play special missions with those guys. I'm very much looking forward to Wrath and Rapture. I'm personally not obviously going to buy it because I don't play demons and I never really have played demons, but I appreciate the fact that we're getting this box in general because it gives us hopefully a little bit of insight into the great game, and it allows us to actually see the great game in a tabletop scenario, which is something we don't see very often, which is obviously lovely. The models look great, even if they're not my particular style. I can't deny they look brilliant. The Fleshhounds, Karanak, the Fiends, and the Enrapturess all look excellent, so hopefully you agree and enjoy them as well. And the new rules, particularly for the Enrapturess, should be interesting to see how they pan out in the future. And hopefully Slaanesh will be along before too long, and we'll get to see the full glory of Slaanesh back in the Mortal Realms in particular, and on the battlefields of 40k. What that exactly will lead to in terms of new models, we will have to see. But I think it's an interesting time as we go into 2019, and I can't see Slaanesh being too far off into the distant future. Oh, you've got G to the Cost of Moon Clan to come, but after that, I think we might be getting Slaanesh very, very soon. But anyway, thank you very much for watching this video. I do hope you've enjoyed it. Let me know what you think in the comments below about Wrath and Rapture, the new units, the new models, and all of the things associated with it. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. This has been Tactica Imperialis, and it's been my thoughts on Realm of Chaos, Wrath and Rapture. I'll see you all again. Bye for now.